Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much, Andrew, for the introduction. I'd also like to thank Katrina, although I know she'll be running a few minutes late, not only for organizing this talk, but also for the series as well. I haven't actually had the chance due to my schedule, at least this year in 2022, to be able to attend the talks, but I found them thus far extremely informative, and I'm really looking forward to the remaining talks that have been scheduled for this year. While I have recently defended my dissertation and earned my PhD, I also like to give a thank you to Scott Aiken, who's here on this call, for training me, mentoring me, being a sponsor, and also sidelining if anything's wrong during this talk. I blame him because he trained me. But on a more serious note, I also would like to acknowledge the land or the people of the land that I'm currently standing on and presenting to you from. So I'm currently in Nashville, Tennessee, which is on the unceded land of the Cherokee and Chickasaw people. So I know that land acknowledgements tend to be kind of political and somewhat controversial, but for me, I think they're really important to do because they not only acknowledge a past tense or at least a historical context, but because it's a constant reminder for me that colonialism and oppression due to colonial features is an ongoing and current process. And I do believe that we need to at least acknowledge and maintain and build our mindfulness of this colonial process, which also in part ties into anti-Black racialism, which is the basic feature of my talk here today. So my talk is on digital blackface and its argumentative implications. Yes, the slide worked. Today I'm going to be giving an overview of a current project of mine where I'm arguing that the usage of, at least non-Black usage of people who utilize digital blackface, and the specific kind of digital blackface that I have in mind is regarding memes, GIFs or GIFs, depending on how you like to pronounce it. I'm going to pronounce it GIFs though. As well as any kind of reactionary images within online arguments should be halted or at least heavily questioned, right? So my critique is different insofar as other accounts of digital blackface who have argued, for the same result that I'm arguing, have made the lines that non-Black users should stop engaging in disseminating GIFs or memes or any kind of reactionary images of Black folks due to the history of minstrel blackface. While I don't necessarily disagree with this assessment and their assessment or ultimate critique of digital blackface paralleling minstrel blackface, I'm more so concerned, or at least interested, in the pragma dialectical violation norms, especially regarding the starting point rule as well as the usage rule. So I'm not so much concerned with the arguments having to do with political correctness. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't agree with them, but I think, I guess, in a more Rawlsian tradition of trying to access more public reasons or universal reason sharing, the pragma dialectical argumentative force against using digital blackface, I think, is going to be more salient than just going, okay, well, this is paralleling minstrel or historical blackface, ergo, if that was bad, then this is bad. So I'm offering at least a different avenue to the same kind of end here, and that's my interest. So what exactly is digital blackface? The term actually has been around for quite a while. It first originated in Joshua Lumpkin Green's 2006 book entitled Digital Blackface, the Repackaging of the Black Masculine Image. And within this book, he was largely concerned with the AI features of what marked Blackness, especially with Black men. And what he noticed was that images that often imitated or resembled, well, essentially gorillas, were often marked or identified as being Black men, as opposed to images that really were Black men. And this phenomena has been talked about in multiple iterations, ranging from artificial intelligence gurus, especially Black women who worked in artificial intelligence, who looked at facial recognition programs, where one particular theorist is able, and she helped work on this identification project where she tried to use her own face to scan a facial recognition, but it wasn't registering. But if she took kind of a white mask, like very Phantom of the Opera-esque white mask, and put it on her face, then it would recognize it as a face. And we could see this problem engaging in not only just like artificial intelligence recognition through photographs, but this problem has been documented even through the technological advances of the Google car. So Google car will clearly identify white pedestrians, but for some reason, because of the way it's being codified within the algorithm, it doesn't recognize Black individuals as people, but more so it categorizes them as objects. So should the machine have to decide between running into a wall or running into a Black person, it will run into the Black person because it just identifies it just as merely one small object as opposed to a wall. So fast forward from 2006 to now, honestly, between 2006 and now, the concept didn't get much traction, at least within social media wise, and much less within academic journals or spheres, until about like, I don't know, what year is this, 2020? So about 6 or so years ago. And the precipice for this was, oddly enough, a Teen Vogue article in 2017 that really brought to the forefront, and then it got retweeted, reshared, reposted, the problems, or at least the implications, and at least the different kind of categories of digital Blackface. And if you haven't recently looked at Teen Vogue, I would say take another look at them, because it's very different from the Teen Vogue that I grew up with, as opposed to now. I mean, it's pretty progressive and at the very forefront of innovative theory. So what exactly is digital Blackface? Well, there's 3 main types, right? There's, in a sense, digital Blackface that I'm going to argue is more innocuous, or at least not so much innocuous. What do I want to say? Less action heavy. So it's going to involve things such as filters. So for example, in 2017, Snapchat for 420 released a Bob Marley filter where participants could take a picture of themselves, utilize the filter, and then all of a sudden they look like Bob Marley, which also, not includes the traditional or emblematic kind of Rastafarian headband, and the dreadlocks or locks, but also literally having a blackened face, right? There's also Face Swap Live, which was instigated by Facebook, where you could take a picture of 2 people and then swap their faces, and then the programming would also swap like skin tone color, right? So there's filters, but then there's also the practice of like blackfishing, or nigger fishing, depending on who you talk to, which is literally taking on the makeup and putting on the makeup to present yourself as Black. Then there's also under that kind of same line category where you have parody accounts where the person who's creating the account is a non-Black person. However, they use an avatar of a Black person to kind of grant it legitimacy. And then there's also GIFs or memes, which is the primary focus of this project that I am presenting to you today. So going through, I did want to give some kind of emblematic examples of each one. So here we have, I'm not sure how many people are actually familiar with K-pop or Korean pop music, but here we have the Korean K-pop star Big Bang Taeyang, who in 2016 utilized one of Snapchat's Kanye West filters, right? So you can see on the right-hand side, this is him unfiltered, and then the left-hand side is him using one of the AI filters. And it clearly looks like a Black man as opposed, and heavily honestly resembles Kanye West to a certain extent. But he posted this in 2016 for Chinese New Year, which was, if anyone recalls, which was the year of the monkey, which has all kinds of implications in and of itself. I'm not necessarily concerned with its usage, but more so just being able to do it in general, because clearly there's a big difference between how he looks without the filter and then with the Kanye West filter. So this is what I mean by filters. So he didn't have to don any kind of makeup, alter his physical appearance in any kind of way. He just put his phone in front of his face, took a picture, and then the filter took over the rest. Then there's a type of blackface, blackfishing or nigger fishing, or also parody accounts. Now, this form of digital blackface, I believe, most accurately maps on to the historical minstrel blackface, where people literally either attempted to pass as Black individuals or at least pretended to be Black. Most oftentimes they would use burnt cork ends to paint their face in Black makeup, right? So at the very top, in terms of my images, I have Iggy Azalea. On the right-hand side, I have an image from her of one of her most recent live performances. And then the left image, however, is one from her most recent music videos. So notice how there's a darkening of skin color. There's also a darkening of hair color. So she's wearing a wig, essentially. Her waist is cinched. She has lip liner that embodies more fuller lips, as well as a very kind of iconic, and I'm even doing it myself, and anyone who knows me personally, I tend to wear hoops anyway. But it's a very kind of iconic Afro-American or Latina style of earrings to have big hoops. At the lower end, I have an image of the Big Minstrel Jubilee by Billy Band, which is very archetype, kind of that minstrel blackface performance where artisans, performers, would put on the burnt cork makeup, draw incredibly big lips for lip liner. But there was a more recent trend within the past few years of YouTube and Instagram models, as well as makeup gurus who wanted to do this kind of transformation challenges, or some of them even started their channels as the more so right-hand side persona. And they essentially donned physical appearances to mimic Black woman features. So notice, especially at the very bottom, we have a very, on the one hand, white looking woman, but yet on her transformation side, she has more darker skin. Again, there's the trope of hoops. The bigger lips, the hair being laid. So that's where any kind of remaining hair, if you pull it up, you slick it back so that it's laying flat and kind of stylized along your scalp line. The wearing of like headbands that way, again, big lip features, defined eyebrows, defined cheekbones, and also tanner skin. Another manifestation of blackfishing, though, that I don't have depicted here in images, is through parody accounts, such as those on especially Twitter, on Instagram, but also on Facebook. So the largest, probably 2 parody accounts would be Things Black Folks Like, as well as Black People Problems, or props, right? So these accounts use a Black avatar as the emblematic figure of who's running the account, which prima facie kind of legitimizes the account as being by a Black person, moderated by a Black person, just run by a Black person. So again, all of these images, especially this category of digital blackface, is very much hearkening back to that minstrel blackface era. However, the category that I'm most interested in, and especially here within this presentation, isn't so much the physical donning of blackface, be it through a filter, or literally tanning your skin, or using darker makeup or darker foundation, or using a particular avatar. The kind of digital blackface that I find interesting is the usage of GIFs, memes, or any kind of reactionary images. So hopefully, some of these images I'm using, or at least that are currently on the screen, are images that are somewhat familiar. So we've got Oprah Winfrey, and this was during her Prince Harry and Meghan Markle interview, where we've got several kinds of just iconic reactions of thinking, of like rejection. We have the infamous GIF. Well, it's in the form of a meme, because over these pandemic years, I've quickly learned that using GIFs and PowerPoints can kind of get glitchy. So I've only got memes here, but hopefully you've also have seen these GIFs before, right? So we've got that, iconic, like, guy holding his like red cup of alcohol, and something happened where he's just like, all right. And then there's the thinking one, like, which I will get into later, can signify multiple meanings, right? So the thinking one. Also here, I've got Queen Bey, or Beyonce, in one of her iconic music videos, like smashing the windows of a car. There's Nene Leakes, which, if you don't know, the Housewives of Atlanta, like she's prolific in so many memes and GIFs. Just all of her different facial expressions. Then we also have James Harden, or NBA player James Harden, and that GIF where someone's asking him a question and he kind of does an eye roll and then just fades away. And then there's also Michael Jackson, the eating of the popcorn, right? So hopefully at least one of these that I've chosen kind of stirs at least something familiar, or some, like, you've seen this somewhere in some form or fashion. So these are the kind of images, memes, or just GIFs that I'm interested in when people have used them, at least non-Black people have used them amongst a argumentative exchange within social media. Now, I don't necessarily have any argumentative exchange, largely because I do believe in the ethics of asking permission to use argumentative exchanges. And thus far, any time that I've noticed this usage, when I've asked the individual if I could use the specific exchange or specifically what they've said, they have declined or just not responded. I might change my stance so that way I can provide a clear example of how these might be used, or just at least fabricate one. But I will say, at the moment, no one has consented for me to use to use this as an exemplar of using argumentative blackface yet. All right. So what's been argued that's the problem with argumentative blackface? Thus far, people have said that what's wrong with argumentative blackface is largely that it reinforces, negative Black stereotypes of us being hyperly aggressive, loud, sassy, and dismissive. So I do want to go back. Notice how Beyonce is being very aggressive here, smashing in windows. That tends to be read, at least in Western culture, as being a very aggressive action, right? So Nene Leakes, the top right-hand side of your screen, whenever you kind of shut your eyes and purse your lips, that usually is read as being very dismissive. James Harden kind of rolling his eyes as being very dismissive. Michael Jackson eating popcorn, although this is from the Thriller music video from the 80s. This meme usually translates into being kind of nosy or sticking your interest in where it doesn't necessarily belong. So all of these things, though, tend to reinforce negative stereotypes about Black individuals, especially the aggressive, loud, and sassy or dismissive trope. And I'll talk more about this specifically insofar as involving Black women and Patricia Hill Collins' account of controlling images of Black women. Some of the critiques have also run that these memes or GIFs renders Black people as just merely objects for non-Black consumption and entertainment. There has been prolific evidence, especially within academia, where Black professors, students tend to perceive Black professors as needing to perform more. If you look at media, so TV and movies, there is constantly a trope of Black individuals needing to fall in line and fitting with these sort of like loud, sassy, or dismissive, or comically ignorant or even aggressive sort of stereotypes. If you have sort of a rom-com and there is one Black female, she often fills that stereotypical role of a loud, sassy Black girlfriend. Okay, so the problem with these GIFs or memes, so goes other arguments, is that it doesn't allow the space for Black folks to exist qua Black folks. So it doesn't allow us to exist in the full gamut of emotional reactions or engagement within arguments. Another line of critique is that each of these GIFs and memes kind of co-opts Black identity and Black communicative or argumentative culture without actually dealing with any of the day-to-day realities of what it means to be a Black person moving through. And I would say, the culture that I'm most familiar with trying to navigate the terrain in is America. Right? So it doesn't, it uses Black culture and identity, but it doesn't actually talk about the day-to-day realities of what it means to, be Black. Okay? Another problem that has been highlighted with the usage of Black memes and GIFs is that it denaturizes race in a way. So and I'll say for this critique, it's not just Black memes and GIFs, but also the filters and the dawning of physical Blackface. Okay, so it uses technology as kind of a sideline of engaging in historical tropes of racism without actually addressing these kind of tropes of racism. So because they aren't explicitly discussed, then the history of Blackface minstrelsy then isn't being discussed. And really, the earliest forms of Blackface, I believe you can find, is within the 1830s. And that's as entertainment. Sociocultural scholar Noel Duen writes that Blackface today, especially within the fashion industry, which is a topic that I'm not necessarily talking about, but you can still see it there. But Blackface illustrates how, quote unquote, white privilege is blind to and also blinds the acknowledgement of white supremacy in everyday society. And this becomes further amplified when we're talking about being digitized, right? Because the proliferation of being online is much faster than it is through any kind of other mode of communication. Like, it has a much wider breadth and accessibility if you post on Facebook or Twitter or any kind of online forums than if you're actually physically in person and engaging with an interlocutor. But really, throughout all of these different kinds of critiques that have thus far been given, ultimately, it's the appreciation and more so the appropriation, right, seem to be muddled through these kind of depictions of social media. So be it like memes, GIFs, or just avatar accounts. So white culture then performs, in essence, Blackface, but doesn't necessarily appear to engage with what's at stakes when their quote unquote white bodies appropriate, although sometimes, by not always, appropriation definitively, sometimes it's through appreciation. So they'll say, well, I appreciate the Black form, so that's why I'm dressing up, which is this case with a lot of the YouTube or Instagram models who have since been exposed for donning Blackface. Is, well, I appreciate the way Black women look, so that's why I decided to do a makeup video, or that's why I decided to do my makeup in such a way. But the way in which these white bodies appropriate the kind of skin tone, ethnic features, and hair of perceived Blackness is incredibly problematic because it deals only with appearance and nothing with actual substance, which is the bulk of my argument, is that there's a certain way in which African-American argumentation utilizes the body, appearance, facial gestures, and just even how we don ourselves. That all is in part and parcel to how we present premises, or even just emotions, or assent or dissent about certain arguments that are being presented to us. So all of this is happening by non-Black users, but the history and the knowledge, or at least the signification as to what something means, like how those facial expressions are meant to mean or be taken up by its own users, is completely being ignored and co-opted. So from the Teen Vogue article, Michaela Jackson says that the real problem with these is that these images include displays of emotion stereotyped as excessive, right? So the actual meaning, I argue, is not being understood. It's just excess stereotypical Black features by non-Black users that's being understood and that's being collated, which is a problem, because often these excessive stereotypes either are, you have the happy, jolly Negro, the sassy Black woman, the Black that's just too loud or too ghetto. And that's a problem, because that's not a true depiction, one, of what the initial image, the meaning from the image is being taken, and then two, how that reverberates. That's not how necessarily I take the image as a speaker of African-American language and engager in African-American argumentation, and how others who are in those categories take it versus like non-proficient users or just i.e. like non-Black users, right? But what Jackson says is that ultimately Black people and Black images are thus relied upon to perform a huge amount of emotional labor online on behalf of non-Black users. So again, it's trying to give an emotion, but the user isn't necessarily knowledgeable about what particular emotions are being expressed, nor are they knowledgeable about the kind of mechanisms, at least argumentatively, that are in play. And again, this all points back to this kind of singular depiction of Blackness, is what previous arguments have put forth, is that we are either sassy, overly happy, or ghetto, or just loud. However, what I would like to put forth, or what I'm hopefully today putting forth, is that what's going on, or at least to me, it's not just harkening back to historical models of minstrel Blackface and this kind of facade and the carrying out of additional stereotypes, but there's something more, insidious at play, or disingenuous at best, or ignorant at best, I guess. And I can best illustrate that through the pragma dialectical rules of engagement. So, drawing from Gricean conceptions of speech acts, the pragma dialectical theory of argumentation views arguments as interactional as well as communicative. So parties involved in these kind of disagreements or arguments or differences of opinion are to obey a set of rules, which is to help ensure that both interlocutors are cooperating within the language game, and that the maxims aid in the fair exchange of ideas and discourse. So this model perceives that the ends, or at least the end goal of argumentation in this case, is the resolution of difference of opinions, as in, if you state P, I state not P, then we can either agree P or not P. We can either jettison the notion entirely of P, or we can negotiate Q, right? So we can either say, P is just no longer up for debate, or let's go through some alternative route, which is Q. So these particular strategies are utilized to, according to Hatlofser and Van Emmeron, to maintain the balance between pursuing the aims of fulfilling one's dialectical obligations and completing the discussion stage concerned as much as possible to one's rhetorical content. Right? So these particular strategies are useful because they look at the pragmatics, but they also feature rhetorical issues, or at least the rhetorical context. So you might be wondering, because I assume many of you are argumentation theorists that are listening right now, or at least here in the Zoom. Why am I turning or focusing on the pragma dialectical model as opposed to just the rhetorical model? All right, so there's two reasons. One is short and the other is more complicated that I'd be happy to answer more questions on during the Q&A. So one, the pragma dialectical model tends to be, at least in my opinion, more rule-laden, and what I am interested in at least this project, are the rules of engagement within argumentation. So the longer reason is that the rhetorical model, as articulated by Tyndale, focuses on argumentation as a communicative practice, which can best be understood by its rhetorical features. Right? That requires, at least in my interpretation, to be context dependent. So because what I am arguing is that the majority of non-Black users of these GIFs and memes, right, or at least reactionary images, do not understand the rhetorical features of African-American argumentation, then the rhetorical model doesn't really necessarily apply to what I'm concerned with, right? Because the rhetorical model depends upon everyone understanding the game, or at least the rhetoric and the rules or the normativity of the rhetoric at play. And what I'm talking about is not is a non-ideal case of people not understanding the rules of rhetoric at play. So I don't necessarily see how the rhetorical model applies much to me here, although I'm open for suggestions, I'm open for debate and contestation. Another reason is that like obligations under the rhetorical model are dependent upon the norms of argumentative exchange between arguers and audiences who understand the context. So I guess that's just a reiteration of my first reason. So it's that this doesn't seem to account for the ways in which people need to code switch their argumentative tendencies, which I've argued about in past papers that I've published, nor does the rhetorical model, I believe, can handle co-option of, or exploitation, even if I'm at best co-option, at worst exploitation, I would argue, of other models of argumentation. Whereas I think the pragma dialectical model, since it has very specific rules of engagement that are not necessarily so context dependent within the rhetorical model, that's why I'm focusing on more so pragma dialectical rules of engagement. I assume probably a lot or most people know these pragma dialectical rules of engagement, so I won't spend too much time, delineating each and every single one. But these are the 10 rules, at least Van Emeren et al. Have delineated, and what is of interest specifically to me is going to be the usage rule as well as the starting point rule. So the usage rule, I know that the usage rule is last, but I'm going to deal with it first. Usage rule states that a party must not use formulations that are insignificantly clear or confusingly ambiguous, and a party must interpret the other party's formulations as carefully and accurately as possible. Right? Whereas the starting point rule states that a party may not falsely present a premise as an accepted starting point, nor deny a premise representing an accepted starting point. So from all of these rules, especially the usage rule and the starting point rule, the pragma dialectical perspective gives way to at least like 4 ways in which we ought to analyze arguments or contributions to someone's arguments. And that's either determining the points at issue, which I'm not necessarily concerned with, but largely what I'm concerned with is recognizing the positions that parties adopt, as well as identifying any kind of implicit or explicit arguments. So spoiler alert, what I am ultimately arguing or putting forth is that through the usage of these GIFs and memes is that there is a misrecognition of parties' positions if a non-prolific Black user is using these memes or GIFs within their argument, or at least within the responses to arguments. So there's a misrecognition here. And if you happen to be a non-Black prolific user, you are not able to identify the implicit, or even I would say like certain arguments might be more explicit to me, but that's because I'm a proficient user. But there's a misidentification of the arguments at hand, right? So there's two main areas in which using these memes and GIFs kind of skew these operations, or at least the ability to utilize a pragma dialectical modus operandi engagement of arguments. So I imagine that the majority of my audience is not familiar with African American argumentation, so I did at least want to spend a few minutes talking about different kind of contexts, and or at least different kind of markers that distinguish African, or what I identify as African American argumentation from more Western style argumentation. First and foremost, what I believe is a defining feature of African American argumentation is the practice of signification, or also known as sounding or snapping, can be playing the dozens or just straight up signifying. But it's a feature, or at least a specific kind of speech that harkens back to a Niger-Congo model of the call and response methods within argumentation. So it relies on indirectness. It can rely on surrogate interlocutors, and it can also be referred to, colloquially speaking, as like reading someone to filth. But it really heavily relies on any kind of exaggeration, irony, and indirection. So it must use kind of coded messages which involve insults, but not just ancillary insults that might not be relevant to the topic, but it's insults that are actually relevant. So the insults and these coded messages move the argument itself, rather than it just being a way to show kind of like in-group affiliation, right? Morgan 2002 says that signification heavily relies on indirection, and the focus can either be on, quote unquote, a person, thing, or action, either for fun or a corrective critique. And it's the corrective critique part that I'm, most heavily leaning on here. So signifying really is a practice that subsumes any kind of other rhetorical tropes. So that includes metaphor, irony, hyperbole, those things along those natures. Oftentimes when I encounter audiences who have not yet heard of signification, usually what they have heard of is not necessarily the term playing the dozens, but a specific kind of language game or argumentative game of playing the dozens entitled Your Mama Jokes, right? So Your Mama Jokes, an example would be, your mama's so poor, she was walking around with one shoe. People asked her what happened to her lost shoe, and she said, I didn't lose one, I found one, right? So those kind of like jokes, those all engage in indirect speech where the joke itself is talking about your mama, but the speaker isn't necessarily talking about like your mom being so poor. It's actually a comment about you, right? So it's, I know at first glance, it can kind of seem, or at least signification can seem kind of ad hominem in terms of fallacious speech, but I will say I am currently working on a paper that talks about the difference between ad hominem and at least Western and formal logic conceptions, and ad hominem and African-American argumentation, right? So it's a much wider breadth, like what you consider to be culturally or at least epistemically relevant to the topic at matter is much more expansive in African-American argumentation than it is in Western conceptions of informal fallacy. So there's a lot more indirected speech that's happening here. For example, if I'm in the proper cultural setting, then if I disagree with someone's point about, I don't know, like the stance on what's happening with the Ukrainian war and Russia, for example, if I respond back with something about like how dry their edges are, so like the edges of their hair, then that might seem out of place in an ad hominem attack in Western conceptions. But really what I'm essentially saying is that, like, you know, dependent upon what their initial argument is that, hey, we should be taking care of the Ukrainians, me talking about their edges is an indirect way of saying, look, you're not even taking care of yourself. So how are we supposed to take care of like other people if you're not even able to take care of yourself? Right? So it might seem initially off topic, but the signification feature is actually indeed on topic. Another feature of African American argumentation tends to be simultaneous speech, which doesn't happen too much, honestly, within internet dialogue, simply because there's the feature of having to hit enter, and then like you present your argument all at once, right? So it's not as though you are, or I'm, you know, talking as I am with you today, and then simultaneous speech would be if one of you decided to interject while I'm talking with my presentation. Under African American argumentation, that would be entirely fine to do. And if anything, I will forthright say it's taken me many years to get used to just talking and hearing my own voice without people actually interjecting to let me know that they actually hear me, or like we're engaging in a call and response model, right? Which is, as I mentioned previously, harkens back to the Niger-Congo model of communication, which can most predominantly be seen in the Black church today, where someone is talking with you, but it's rude not to interject while they're talking to you, because those interjections let me know that you're actually hearing me and that you're listening to me. Another feature is going to be talking with an attitude. However you might define an attitude, that is up to you, but there is a wide variety of ways in which attitudes can be defined, but that is another feature. So you might seem overly sarcastic, you might be using hyperbole, or there's a very specific tone in your voice. All of that is acceptable. So that harkens back to my memes that I showed of like the eye rolling, like that's talking with an attitude. That kind of lip pursing, like that's talking with an attitude. All of those are definitely acceptable modes of speech and argumentation within the African American culture. So there's other, you know, with the side kind of eye and like facial expressions, body language, like those are all non-linguistic features. There's also like hand gestures. So like I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was very much like talk to the hand. Like you would literally put your hand up when you're done. Okay, like that's acceptable. That's not seen as necessarily rude and stopping argument, like interaction between arguers, but that's just completely acceptable to do. And nowadays, I think it's more of like suck teeth. So that would mean with the red styrofoam cup where you're kind of like making that face, but other times it could be with the audible sound of kind of deal, that's suck teeth. But all of these are non-linguistic features within African American argumentation. Right. So one last part I'll say about signification, because I think it's the signification that's most commonly going on when we're looking at memes and GIFs, is that Morgan regards signifying as speakers who use indirectness actually mean to target certain individuals, and they mean to do so indirectly. The most common thing that I see happening within non-competent users, non-Black users, is that they mean to, like what the deployment is is that they are saying it directly to their interlocutor, but signification actually isn't meant directly to their interlocutor. It's meant to be sidelined. Your interlocutor that you might be speaking to, oftentimes, as I've argued elsewhere, is a proxy for your direct target. So using a signifying meme directly with someone else in mind is a miscorrect usage, and under my account. So the harden, that's a misdirect usage. He's not necessarily blowing off the interviewer who asked the question. What he's blowing off is more so, the structure that asks the question itself, or that makes it a valid question in the first place, or it could have been like the media execs who wanted him to ask the question, but it would be taking it inappropriately if the interviewer actually took it personally, that Harden like dismissed him with an eye roll, and then that kind of dramatic like exit out of the frame gesture that he did. With Nene Leakes, the upper right hand side, it's that kind of pursed lips and like shutting of your eyes. That's not necessarily dismissive to what always is being said, but it's other things at play. Right? So signification it's not as narrow as Western culture tends to make it out to be. Right? So I find it to be incredibly problematic that a lot of non-Black proficient users tend to use these GIFs and memes without knowing really the full gamut of what they are talking about, or what the meme or GIF is supposed to signify, or at least argumentatively present. So at this point, you might be wondering, especially because I've said multiple times, the non-Black or the non-competent non-Black user. All right, well, what about competent Black users of African American argumentation? Like, what are they able to use these GIFs under your account, Tempest? I would say yes, under at least according to the usage rule, right? So the usage rule says that you have to at least understand what is being said, or you can't use confusingly ambiguous or insufficiently clear arguments or premises, right? So if you're proficient in African American language and therefore African American argumentation, then according to the usage rule, that's perfectly fine. However, because my focus is also on the starting point rule, which again, the starting point rule covers not falsely presenting a premise as an accepted starting point, nor denying a premise representing an accepted starting point. I argue that it's going to be very hypocritical for non-Black, either proficient or non-proficient users to use these GIFs and memes as starting points, largely because at least if you're on the American continent, we operate in a society that punishes Black users for using the same dialectical practices. Like throughout this entire presentation, I really have not been engaging in any kind of African American language or African American argumentation. If I did so, I probably wouldn't have made it as far in my career as I have, okay? Because it is a point of fact that if you tend to use eye rolling, then it is seen, at least in a lot of academic circles, as being incredibly dismissive and inappropriate and non-collegial and just non-civil means of argumentation. You're viewed as being hyper emotional or irrational, and not therefore a subject, or at least a proper interlocutor for engagement within good rational debate. So ultimately, non-Black users, whether you're proficient or not, you are not under the same kind of scrutiny of using these kind of memes or GIFs as people who are actually Black and either use these memes or GIFs or actually in person engage in this kind of dialectical rhetorical argumentative practice in real life. And that is ultimately my issue. So while yes, if you're proficient in this, I say, yeah, okay, go ahead and use it, but you still shouldn't, because there's this other fact of the standards here, or at least the starting points, not being equitable for both Black and non-Black users. So I also have the issue of argumentative injustice, which ties heavily into my last point of non-Black speakers not being able to use, or they're not subject to the same level of scrutiny. There's Bondi's notion of argumentative injustice, which is especially harmful in three primary ways. One, it undermines the rationality of the endeavor. It can distort an arguer's stance or status in the community, and if repeated enough, credibility deficits can damage the ability of the person to whom the prejudice attaches to engaging productivity in arguments. So cases where an arguer's social identity brings listeners like too much or too little credibility, that's an issue. So that's ultimately what I'm focused on, is that there's an argumentative injustice at play with the starting point rule. And that's further enforced when we consider accounts of the way in which Black women have been seen, a la Collins, Patricia Hill Collins, that Black women are historically seen as either sassy, ghetto, or ill-educated. This further plays into the inability to have the same kind of starting point with some of these argumentative gestures or nonverbal assertions. So given all this, I argue that digital blackface should not be used for non-Black users, whether they are proficient or not. There is the historical signification and the paralleling to Black minstrelsy, which I don't necessarily reject, but I'm more concerned with the argumentative implications, and more specifically with the argumentative pragma dialectical rule violations. And so, thank you.